Today on Straight Talk Africa, the politics of democratic transition in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We'll discuss why, since she regained her political independence in 1960, the Congo has never experienced smooth transition of power from one leader to another, and what needed to happen in order for that to occur. That's coming up next right here on Straight Talk Africa. Hello, welcome to Straight Talk Africa, live from the Voice of America studios here in Washington. It's Wednesday, October 12th. I am Shaka Ssali.
Well, hello to you, Shaka, and hello to all our viewers and listeners on the continent and elsewhere. I'm Mariama Diallo, your social media reporter.
Today, it's the politics of democratic transition in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Well, with passions running very high on all sides, coming up later in our STA inbox, we'll share your thoughts on our topic du jour through your emails, tweets, and Facebook comments. That's ahead on Straight Talk Africa. Hope you'll stay with us.
In the DRC, dozens of people have died in clashes between security forces and protesters angered by what opposition groups and observers say is President Joseph Kabila's plan to postpone elections and retain power beyond the constitutional two-term limit. My colleague Paul Ndiho, has more.
The streets of Kinshasa are calm following armed government protests last month that killed nearly 50 people. For months, the country has suffered a simmering anger over what opponents of President Joseph Kabila believe are his efforts to hold on to power beyond his constitutional term limit, either by delaying elections or reversing the constitution. The United Nations has voiced a concern and called on all sides to exercise restraint. The spokesman for the UN High Commission for Human Rights, Rupert Colville, says the international body is deeply worried about the violence.
We urge the authorities to ensure that existing national and international standards on the appropriate use of force are fully respected by all security personnel. We call for a credible and impartial investigation to bring those responsible for human rights violations and criminal acts to justice, and we stand ready to support such an inquiry.
Since attaining independence from Belgium in 1960, the massive, resource-rich nation has experienced a dictatorship, poor governance, poverty, and insecurity. Congolese President Joseph Kabila has been in power since 2001. He won disputed elections in 2006 and in 2011. In June, Moise Katumbi, a popular opposition candidate and former governor of the Katanga province, was sentenced in absentia to 36 months in prison on what he says were trumped-up charges, and also fined $6 million for illegally selling the property which a Greek citizen claimed belonged to his family. Despite the charges, the opposition leader has vowed to return to Congo from Europe to run for the presidency, with the backing of 7 opposition parties.
Population are ready for election, which is important. 99% are ready for the election, and they are waiting for the right time. You don't want to make a putsch. You don't want to make a coup d'etat. You want to follow our constitution. And if they don't call for election, the people of Congo are going to say, Mr. President, you didn't respect what you're supposed to respect. It's time to go. Bye-bye, Mr. President. Bye-bye, the government of Congo. There is no any mistake. Our demonstration are going to be always peaceful demonstration.
It remains unclear when elections in the DRC will be held, if not in November. Kabila's second term in office expires on December 19th, and Congolese appear split on whether he should remain in office until elections are organized. A recent national dialogue was boycotted by many opposition parties and failed to resolve the issue. The Electoral Commission says it needs until December 2018 to complete the work of registering all voters and readying the country for an election. President Kabila's office issued a statement calling for calm and inviting the entire population to go about their daily activities now that the security is again fully ensured. The United States is pressuring Kabila to respect the constitution and hold elections on time. There are also growing concerns over what they say are efforts to stifle peaceful protests. Paul Ndiho, VOA News, Washington.
Thanks, Paul, for that report. For an update on the latest developments in DRC, we are joined by reporter Emily Iobo from the capital, Kinshasa. Good evening, Emily.
Good evening.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
What is the mood like on the ground in the capital, Kinshasa?
Well, in Kinshasa, in terms of activities, at least, it's very much business as usual. People are going about their daily activities. But what we can notice is some more heavier police presence in some neighborhood when the protests happen. But other than that, when you talk to people, some of them just want to comment on the political situation. But some others, whether they support the government or the opposition, are all following very closely the political dialogue. And they all agree on the need to find a consensus. They're all a bit concerned that it might not be reached, but they're all hopeful that all parties eventually will come together and agree, and so the situation does not escalate.
Give us a sense as to what they are specifically talking about the transition from Joseph Kabila to another leader.
In terms of transition, what do people want, I mean?
What I mean is that the incumbent president's term comes to an end in December, and yet there are no elections scheduled for this year.
No, exactly. That's one of the contention points between the opposition and between the government. The government is blaming the opposition for delaying the national dialogue, and that's why the elections cannot be held at the end of the year. Meanwhile, the opposition is saying that the conditions were not met for proper dialogue. That's why it's been dragging for so long. Today, they are still not agreeing on how the transition should take place. So it's still very much in discussion.
You know, the government says that it is justified for President Kabila to stay in office until another leader is elected, perhaps up to next 1 or 2 years. Do you get a sense when you talk to people on the ground that the government of Kabila is tampering with the constitution of the country?
Well, what they think is they are. Really, what is repeated often is, okay, maybe he can stay if everybody agree on this, if the opposition is okay with it, if there is indeed elections planned even in 2 years from now. But everybody has to agree on it. If there is part of the opposition who is not agree on it, it's going to be chaos. That's what somebody told me. They all need to agree on what's going to happen next. So that's still something that is being debated. Yeah.
So how do you resolve this issue, at least given that most of the opposition seem, to a certain degree, to have boycotted the dialogue initiated by the president?
That is correct. The main opposition party, the UDPS, and along with some other opposition parties, have boycotted because they didn't get all the conditions they were asking for. So there's special protests in the 1920s last month, which didn't go well, and they are still boycotting it until the conditions are met. They are still not taking part in the dialogue. So that means that it's even if they reach an agreement, it's going to be a very partial agreement because it's going to only involve a part of the opposition and the government. which is not ideal, really.
When you talk to government officials, what do they say is the way forward?
They say that they've been doing their best to include everybody, and that the opposition is asking, their demand is just impossible to meet. They are saying that they ask for the release of political prisoners, and for the government officials, what these people did were criminal, and so they're not going to release them. They're also saying it's out of the question to replace the mediator in the discussion. So all of these little points are not going are not being resolved at this point. And they're also telling the opposition that they can just come around and take part in the discussions, but obviously the Rassemblement is not going to do that.
Well, Emily, thank you so much for your insight all the way from Kinshasa.
Thank you very much.
You're most welcome. Joining us here in our Washington studios are two distinguished guests. Claude Gatebuche, Executive Director, African Great Lakes Action Network, and Ntare Alimas, an independent consultant in governance and anti-corruption. We invited Francois Barumune, the DRC ambassador to the United States, to give his government's position, but due to circumstances beyond his control, he could not join us. Well, gentlemen, I have to say that I'm profoundly honored and exceedingly humbled to have the opportunity to host you on Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shaka.
You're most welcome. Later in the program, we'll give you, the audience, a chance to call and talk with our guests. The number to call is 202-619-3111. Yes, country code is 1. Let me come to you briefly. First of all, Claude, how have you been?
I've been very well.
You've been very well?
Yes, very well.
What do you think should be the solution in Kinshasa? In very, very few words.
I think there needs to be an election.
There needs to be an election.
And it needs to be as soon as possible, because the government of the DRC has had 5 years since the flawed elections of 2011 to plan an election. And they cannot claim that they have run out of time now, given that there's only a month or 2 months left for the president to vacate the presidency. And I do not think that extending his rule basically perpetually by saying he will stay in power until the next person comes, I'm not sure how they say that with a straight face.
I see. Ntare, what about you?
Well, I'll piggyback on what Claude said. However, I'll come to this thing. I think that what's going on in Kinshasa and in the Congo at this time, even in the diaspora, is that we have this sudden call or burst of emotions versus facts. People are looking at the situation. It's passionate, of course. It's the future of the country. But anytime you put face-to-face emotions and facts, emotions are going to win. Yet, emotions are not going to be in the best interest of the country. Emotions are going to give us what we saw recently.
Why are you talking about emotions? We have a constitution here.
Let me finish. Yeah, because this is where we are. Emotions give us people in the street. But when you start looking at the facts are these. Yes, 5 years since 2011, the government knew they had to hold elections. Facts are they didn't do it.
Why?
Why? Why is, I believe, in my reading of what's going on, what I would call a sum of many things. The government not wanting, first of all, it's deliberate what they did. It's not that. But at the same time, the opposition has to also take their own responsibility in what is happening. The civil society has to take their own responsibility in what is happening. The parliament is also part of this whole thing. So there are blames to share. What I am looking at this point is, where do we go from here?
We'll come to a little bit more about that later, but now we'll pause for a short break, and we would like to remind you that Straight Talk Africa is now on the social networking website Twitter, and we are tweeting live. Follow us at VOA Shaka. That's VOA Shaka. Join in on today's discussion with your questions and comments. And don't forget to use the hashtag VOADRC. And we are still on Facebook. Just enter the keyword Straight Talk Africa, become a fan, and connect with other friends of the Voice of America. We'll be right back with you, so please don't go away.
We are able to touch on things that are important to people on an everyday basis. We hope that our viewers are getting inspired when they watch our show. They're getting a view of the world from a different perspective, things that perhaps are not in their immediate vicinity. Today, I could put in on the show something that is a little different, a little unique, and this gives me that inspiration to come to work.
This is Straight Talk Africa on the Voice of America. What is your opinion about today's topic? Call us at 202-619-3111. U.S. country code 1. When you call, remember the following. Ask only one question. Keep your comment brief and turn down the volume on your radio or television. Now let's return to Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you very much, Esther Gidui-Yuwat, and welcome back to Straight Talk Africa, coming to you live from Washington. Let me come back to you immediately. Claude, you heard, of course, what Ntaro has to say. What about the fact that, yes, as you said, this government has had 5 years to think about the upcoming election? It has a constitution, frankly, to follow. The incumbent president is supposed to hold elections next month, November, and step down December. Why did they think about this before?
As my colleague, Ms. Antal, mentioned, it's been deliberate. And I think they're taking a leaf out of the neighborhood in the Great Lakes region, where we've got this epidemic of president for life. You've got this happening in Uganda, it's happening in Rwanda, it's happening in Burundi, it's happening in the Republic of Congo, it's happening in Angola. The whole Great Lakes region is infected with this disease of presidents wanting to be president for life. In addition, the other factor to it is there is the attitude and the policies of the international community, specifically the United States, that continues to support some of the dictators in the region, like President Museveni and President Kagame of Rwanda, and now they're in an awkward position to hold him accountable when he can just say, you let Museveni do it, you let Kagame do it, what's the problem with me doing it? And so I think all of these factors coming together, and also the fact that this is a government, this is a president that came in through war by the barrel of a gun. He was not brought by the people. He was not elected the first time he became president. He was elected in 2006, and in 2011 carried out a flawed election by all accounts. And yet the international community rubber-stamped that election and allowed him to proceed with no sanctions, no consequences, no accountability. And the lack of accountability is what is pushing all of these presidents to remain president for life in their countries, because they know, just like Kisena Bray a few months ago was held accountable after decades of evading justice from the survivors of his atrocities, that the survivors of the atrocities of the Congo starting in 1996 when the Congo was invaded by Rwanda and Uganda, the survivors of all of these killings by the government when they go out and exercise their right to demonstrate and to express their opinions publicly, will demand accountability. And part of the reason why these presidents are staying in power is, of course, the support from outside, and also the internal factors where they're leading by the barrel of a gun, but also to evade justice when the people start demanding justice.
But if that is the case, then how come they have sort of come with selective justice, if you will? Because they don't mind about Kigali, they don't mind about Kampala, they don't mind about Brazzaville, they don't mind about Rwanda, but they mind about Kinshasa and Bujumbura. Why?
Yes, and that is the double standard that I was pointing out, and the duplicity of the international community. And again, I'll speak specifically to the United States. As a U.S. citizen, I'm a taxpayer, and part of my taxes are going to fund these governments. I think they see it as a little bit of a softball to go after Kabila and not Kagame. But you also have Museveni, who is Museveni and Kagame, who are providing basically military contractors or soldiers for hire in the region, in the various parts in Sudan, in Central African,
Sudan?
Yes, in South Sudan, in Central African Republic, in Somalia, all of that, in places where the United States would, or the international community would rather not send their own troops from their own countries because they're sensitive to bodies coming home in bags.
I see. But what about the fact that someone might tell you, if in fact that is the reason, then what about Burundi? Burundi is providing the same boots in Somalia. It's part of AMISOM, in fact, has the second largest contingent. It is providing troops elsewhere in the region. So why target President Pierre Nkurunziza, who in fact is not even changing the constitution, but in fact tweaking it?
I think it's all because, again, he is an inconvenient presence to Rwanda and Uganda, who are even stronger allies to both Rwanda and Uganda in the region, and therefore an inconvenience to the United States and the international community, who are tight and close with the presidents of Uganda and Rwanda. And the other thing is, I just think that it's a lot easier to mobilize opinion against somebody like Nkurunziza and Kabila internationally than it is to mobilize public opinion against somebody like Kagame, who is falsely known as someone who stopped the genocide in Rwanda.
Ntar, what about you? Do you agree with Claude?
I think, well, I don't know. There's a little bit, let's be a little bit blunt here. What's at play is the interests of the countries that make up the so-called international community. Unless you start looking at them one by one, then you wouldn't understand why it is easier to, I guess, close your eyes on what a Museveni is doing or what a Kagame is doing and look at what Nkurunziza is doing. Because let's be clear, when they present Nkurunziza as the guy that has to go, think about rare earths that have been discovered recently in Burundi, meaning that everything that you find today in Eastern DRC, now you find in Burundi. Now you know that Nkurunziza has decided to go with bricks to sell those rare earths. So at that time, you become a threat to the national interests of the United States, of Belgium, of France, and that becomes another thing to look at.
But what about the fact that he in fact supports the vital national security interests of the Western world, including the United States? In Somalia, his troops are the second largest contingent fighting against Al-Shabaab.
Exactly. And there you start becoming, you say, if you look at that contingent, right, and what it survives because all these international powers help out Burundi. So they look at Burundi as a small piece. But at the same time, it's the same thing that is happening with Rwanda, because Rwanda actually gets the bulk of the help from the United States because of what military help, because of what they do in the against Al-Shabaab in Somalia and so on and so forth. So at that point, it's a good question, because if you look at the situation is the same, then you have to ask yourself, what's the new dawn? What's the new data that really makes it for one to have to go and for the other to stay? But let's not forget the DRC here, because the DRC, in this particular case, also becomes a place where economical interests, mineral interests, and other interests will play more than what everybody wants to look at in terms of the politics of on the ground.
It is the largest, of course, country in sub-Saharan Africa in terms of land mass. It probably happens to be the only country on that continent bordering 9 other nations. And it is a country, of course, as you said, that is blessed with unique, wealth and a lot of resources.
Correct.
But what about the people of the Congo themselves? They have been independent since 1960. So we're talking about 56 years of independence, really.
Yeah.
Where are they when they are needed? How come they don't rise to the occasion and decide who should be their masters? There has never been a single peaceful transition from 1960 to today as we talk.
Okay. Good. And I like that question, which were, personally, I would say to people who are watching you and say, look, everybody wants to call this crisis a crisis with no end in sight. Remember, after the assassination of Lumumba, the Congo had gone through worse than this. Yet, they got to something. When Abdullah became prime minister, what they did is they did the same type of dialogue that we're seeing in today. However, they didn't allow them to play a circus. The game, the political game that you're seeing in Kinshasa is a circus to me, which means they were in one place, they sat down, lived like really students on campus at the University of Lovanium at that time, and they had the mission to find a solution. Go sit down, find a solution to the country. I know I jumped a little bit.
So what was the solution?
The solution is that
Mobutu Sese Seko was a bank?
No, that was when Abdullah became prime minister.
Yeah, but I'm talking about Mobutu, who had the real power for 32 years.
Well, no, that was before Mobutu took power. But I see the gist of your question, and the gist of your question actually comes to this. Where are the Congolese people when things get worse? But I'll tell you this. When Mobutu took power, right, you remember that there was all those uprisings about, not only Chombe, Mulele, etc. But at that time, Mobutu came in as a stabilizing, energy.
For who?
Well, 1965, I believe that at that point it was needed. However, Mobutu...
But for who?
For whom?
For the Congolese people?
Well, let's put it this way. I wouldn't find any African leader who took the power at that time who was really for the people. At this particular point, my reading...
You mean Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere in Tanzania was not a leader of the people?
By force. Who took power by force at that time, who have been for the people. It was always...
Has there ever been on the African continent?
I can't find. That's what I said. I cannot find what,
a man who seized the power.
Who seized
and
the power
became democratic.
Well, maybe, let me contradict myself. Mali, when the president first took power and said, I will be in power for 1 year, I will hold elections and everything. So I'll contradict myself there. However, in general, that has not happened.
I see.
But let me go quickly to Kabila.
More later, because time is not our best ally.
Oh, okay, thanks.
You're tuned into Straight Talk Africa. We'll have more of a discussion in a moment. But first, here is Mariama Jaro. Take it away, Mariama.
Well, thanks, Shaka. Still to come, we'll reveal some of the outstanding feedback we've received from our audience through social media. Stay tuned.
youth are not just the next generation of African leaders, they are today's leaders. And this is the time to invest in them. Today, not tomorrow. So let's connect. Let's engage with each other on issues that will transform our societies. Innovation, leadership, entrepreneurship, things that you're doing to move the continent forward, to make you the greatest generation that Africa has known. It's Upfront every Wednesday, 17:30 UTC, right here on the Voice of America.
This is Straight Talk Africa on the Voice of America. Call us now with your questions and comments. The number is 202-619-3111 and the U.S. country code is 1. Call us direct and we'll call you right back. Remember to turn down the volume on your radio or television and keep your comments brief. Now back to Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gizu Yuwat, and of course welcome back to Straight Talk Africa, live from Washington. Once again, it's time to bring in my colleague and social media reporter, Mariama. Take it away again, Mariama.
Well, thanks, Shaka. The head of the UN mission in the DRC, Maman Sambo Sidikou, on Tuesday told the UN Security Council that the electoral crisis has become a constitutional crisis with deepening political polarization and no immediate resolution in sight. He says all sides appear more and more willing to resort to violence to achieve their ends. And if this trajectory continues, he believes large-scale violence is all but inevitable. Well, this leads us to our question of the week, which asks, what mediation steps are needed to find a peaceful resolution in the DRC's ongoing political dispute? Well, starting off the conversation is a viewer in Tanzania with our letter of the week.
Zakaria Mwefani from Tanzania writes, I wonder why most of African leaders tend not to abide by their respective constitutions in which they swore to uphold. No one seems to care about the Constitution. It appears the statutes of the Constitution are only for poor people or opposition party rallies.
That was Zakaria from Tanzania. Before we move on to more of your opinions, I'd like to thank you all for using all the social media platforms to communicate with us. And if you are unable to listen to us on the radio or watch us on TV, please note that we are live on Facebook. Also, we are tweeting live today. Just use the hashtag VOADRC. And if you haven't yet, do follow us on Twitter. Speaking of it, let's go to a tweet from Dastan Bambwe Sigie, who says that in democratic systems, strong leaders abide by their constitutions and step aside when their terms of office ends. Another tweet from Tom Mugisha. He answers our question by saying, it's simple. The Constitution must be respected and not amended for political reasons. This is Africa's problem. Now to a comment from our Facebook page. Danielle Mukatasha from Zambia writes, President Joseph Kabila needs to step down. Why are African leaders so stubborn when it comes to listening to the people? Whether right or wrong, the people should decide whom they want to be their leader. Well, it sounds pretty simple, but obviously very complicated, right? Shaka and Guest, what do you say?
What about that, Claude?
I agree with a lot of the comments from social media because, one of the things that I wanted to add to the conversation is that the resolve of the people of the Congo cannot be questioned. And they're actually participating in calling for this change because, in my opinion, the most democratic thing a person can do is to express their opinion in public. And there is no other way to do it than demonstrating. And when I see the people in the DRC, in the streets, calling for change and being shot for expressing their opinions, I think it's it's crazy that someone who swore to uphold the Constitution has now caused the people to go
defend it and protect it.
Right. And now, instead of all of that, the people are having to go uphold, defend it, and protect it. And they're giving their lives on top of that as a result of pushing someone who actually swore to do it. And so I think that the people of the Congo, since they have been refused the opportunity to go to the ballot, are speaking up with their feet and their signs in the streets.
I see.
And I think the Congo sets the tone for the region. And seeing them do what they're doing now gives hope that the rest of the region will follow and demand change in their countries.
Mariama, any more reaction from the social media world, please?
Yes, we'll go to another comment from Taban Goodman Emmanuel from Uganda, who writes that President Kabila should be allowed to rule because the DRC, formerly Zaire, of course, had never experienced democracy as it does today. The problem is not who rules the Democratic Republic of Congo, but how the country further implements democratic policies already in place. That's a very interesting comment, and to which Rashid Kiliza from Tanzania disagrees with and says President Joseph Kabila should abide by the Constitution. 15 years are enough. It's time for him to step down. He should note that contentment is natural wealth. Luxury is artificial poverty. Wow. Two opposing views made here. Once again, your thoughts.
Ntaro, what about you?
Well, very on point, I think, comments. Let me, before I talk a little bit of that, because I will be amiss if I don't recognize that the DRC is still a country today because the people of Eastern DRC stood up against the aggression of Rwanda and Uganda and DRC, and so because if we don't say that, we are being disingenuous in terms of fighting for their country. Now, to those comments, a fact is the mandate of President Kabila is at the end. As a person who works for governance, who wants to abide by the rules of governance, the process is clear. There has to be transfer of power from one president to another. Trying to play with it, right, is just that, a game.
But what about if in fact he tells you that his move is right on the money? He is not violating the Constitution because, in fact, the Constitution is a very, very confusing document. I did my homework and found, for example, that in fact it provides two things, but has an inbuilt loophole. For example, the Constitutional Court may have made the right interpretation in part because that part, in fact, is provided for. Although there is another part which says that, in fact, in a situation like that, you could have the president of the Senate head a transitional government and hold elections. And yet, his judges, and somebody, of course, might say he's the one who appointed them, but in most countries, these judges are appointed by presidents anyway. So what about that? The guy says, I have not violated the Constitution.
Yet. I have not violated the Constitution yet. Because at this point, people have to understand that what's going on is actually a play, to stay in power. Kabila understands it. What we are dealing with at this point, and in terms of what actually is the national dialogue that's going on there, right, was a unique opportunity for these politicians to come together. And, you just don't need to say he has to go. You have to say, how does he go? What are the consequences that you need to actually play around so that this should not happen? As you just said, if the Constitutional Court says he can stay until such a time where there will be a transfer of power after elections, for those people who want to believe in the rule of law, that's the law. That's what you do. Now the point becomes, for somebody who has played around, who has delayed organizing elections, how do you reward them, so to speak, by playing that game? And that's where, for me, I said everybody needs to sit around that table, use the interest of the country as the most important thing, and not if I should be in power or if X will be in power, but what is for the best interest of the country.
So, in fact, as far as the law is concerned, Kabila is legally in office, except that people might say that politically he may be perceived as being illegitimate. Thanks, Mariama, for bringing us this week's audience reaction.
Well, that will do it for today's social media segment. Just a reminder that we appreciate all the feedback, whether it's in social media form or using other means to communicate to us. Please keep them coming. If you are a new fan, just drop us a line at africatv@voanews.com. Once again, our email address is africatv@voanews.com, or post your comment on our Facebook page. Just enter the keywords Straight Talk Africa. Be sure to visit us online at voaafrica.com, or you can join our YouTube channel. Just sign up to VOA TV to Africa, and don't forget to follow us on Twitter at VOA Shaka. A reminder that the show is streaming live every Wednesday. Just go to the VOA Straight Talk Africa TV program page on our website, or simply watch us live on your mobile device. Just download the VOA mobile app. Well, now let's take a look at what's on tap for next week's program.
On the next Straight Talk Africa, we look at the role of the Darfur Women Action Group in Western Sudan. We'll discuss what key issues the organization is tackling in Darfur. That's next on Straight Talk Africa.
Welcome back, and we are discussing the politics of democratic transition, the DRC. Our distinguished guests are Claude Gatebuche, Executive Director, African Great Lakes Action Network, and Ntaro Alimas, an independent consultant in governance and anti-corruption. He invited Francois Barumune, the DRC ambassador to the United States, but due to circumstances beyond his control, he was unable to join us. Well, gentlemen, I have to say once again that profoundly honored and exceedingly humbled to have the opportunity to host the two of you on Straight Talk Africa.
I'm also profoundly honored and exceedingly humbled.
You're most welcome. I have to say, by the way, that I stand corrected. In fact, there have been a couple of generals that seized the power and pretty much delivered the goods to their people. We're talking about the 1952 coup of Colonel Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt. Some people would say that his coup was a positive step in the right direction, that at that time the fellow King Farouk and what have you were very, very despotic. We can also talk about, of course, the Colonel Matthew Karekou in Benin at one time, correct? And you gave an example, of course, at some point in Mali, even though years later we find in the fact that there was really no democracy, it was a facade.
Yeah. My contention with that part of our history is that that's what leads us to today. That's what makes in our people, in our military even, think that, oh, there can be an elected government, but because one side or, even a big chunk of the population is against that person, then it's time to seize, guns, create havoc in the country, and take power. That is a very dangerous trajectory. And, as a matter of principle, I reject that. And that's why even for today, I'm rejecting the fact that somebody is trying to say, well, let's create a special regime in Kinshasa so that there would be, let's say, this solution to this crisis. My thing becomes, once you get out of this process of democratically elected leaders, then it will take you time and a long time to get back into it.
But what do you think really motivates a Joseph Kabila? He's a very young man, obviously, as so far we know, an incredibly rich man. He has had the opportunity to be at the political harem of his country for 15 years. Why wouldn't he not really want to step down, do other things, so that he gives an opportunity to other people to take on the mantle? What is he up to, really? Is it because he finds himself in a regional context of the Great Lakes region, where, for example, you have a José dos Santos, who in fact is the second, perhaps the second reigning presidential monarch in the world, after, of course, Theodore Obiang Nguema of Equatorial Guinea?
Mm-hmm. I think it's the case of where when people forget their history, they are bound to repeat it. See, when Mobutu seized power, he came in as young, dynamic, opened up a little bit of what we can call economic growth, and then took what I would say...
The man who enjoyed his champagne.
He enjoyed
his
power.
Houses in Lausanne.
And then, all of a sudden, he started to become a strong man, and he stayed there.
Corrupted the country.
The thing in the Congo today is that actually you're getting new wine in old vases. Really, Kabila came in. I'll give him props to have opened up that, what I'll call, media, say freedom in the Congo. People can talk and say whatever it is that he has been able to do. Now he's making that same mistake that Mobutu made, which is you take, a taste of power. Some of your political advisors who, oh my God, they happen to be former Mobutu advisors, are telling him, oh, well, you can stay. The people like you. No, the people don't like you.
Very interesting.
So that's really where I'm saying the Congolese people have changed ever since. They do not want any more dictators. And unless people take it that way, then we are in big trouble.
Well, of course, Kabila will tell you that he was democratically elected by his people. And again, as I said, at least legally, he is not in violation of the Constitution, because the last time I checked, the Constitutional Court endorsed his move, correct?
I think he's still legally the president of the DRC until December 19th, when his term expires.
No, legally, he is still president until a new leader is chosen, at least as far as the country's constitutional court is concerned, correct?
That's correct. However, the governing is a matter of also looking ahead. See, when we people who do governance always say politicians deal with the short term, we deal with the long term. And as I look at the situation today, I will give it to them that the Constitutional Court, right, has given him legality, but not legitimacy.
Correct.
And then with that legality, now let's think about it. What tells us that, 2017, there are elections, then there will be, there's this problem. Yesterday it was money, we didn't have money. Tomorrow what's going to be? So that I can stay on and on. See, that's really where, for me, I'm saying you got to start putting a lid on it before it actually explodes.
But what about the fact that, again, this is a gentleman who happens to be in a neighborhood where he looks across the river. You have Sassou Nguesso, who has in fact been in the power, I think, for more than 32 years. If you put all these together, if you go south again, you see José, dos Santos, and if you go a little bit, is it northeast, you go to Kigali, where someone is supposed to be legally probably the next president of Rwanda for the next 34 years. And then, of course, you have Uganda, and you have, Burundi at least is tweaking the constitution. They didn't quite change it, but one might ask, frankly, why doesn't he at least follow the example of Tanzania, where he spent most of his youth?
I think part of the reason, again, why he's wanting to stay, he is following in the neighborhoods, in the act of the neighborhood, where everybody wants to be president for life, and everyone seems to get 30 years or more. Except with the exception of Burundi, of course. Kagame is coming up on 30 years. Museveni has already made his 30 years this year. Dos Santos and Sassou Nguesso have already passed their 30 years. And I think every one of them is trying to set a record. But the way to resolve this thing, the way to move forward and both save the country from chaos and save himself from consequences of plunging the country into the crisis is to proceed and organize an election and just leave like the Constitution says. When his second term is over, go ahead and hand over power and hand it over peacefully.
To whom? Well, I gather that we have to go to the lifeline of the show, which the telephone callers. Good evening, Tafa from Ghana. You're most welcome to Straight Talk Africa.
Hello, good evening, Shaka.
Terrific. How are you?
I'm great, Shaka. My regard to your guests in their studio.
Hello.
I thank them very much for the wonderful submission. My question is this, Shaka. Don't they think that it's time for people of the DRC to take their destiny into their own hands? Since it's open secret that their neighbors are interfering into their elections affairs, it is not the time for them to get up and make sure that every foreign leader or any group of people will interfere into their elections affairs, because it's becoming African in China. We know that some of the neighboring countries are benefiting from DRC. It's not that it's in other countries. We know that they are benefiting. Africa #1 parent state is using DRC.
Thank you. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Tafa. We have to be democratic. We have to be democratic, Tafa, because we do have a lot of other people in the line. Let's go to Patrick from Nigeria.
Good evening, Mr. Shaka. Good again.
Terrific. How are you?
My question, my question to our guest: civil unrest or peace and tranquility, which is the best option for DRC? Looking at what is happening, you see, people voted for Kabila because of his father, and because of his father, made people to vote at that best time. Now, I wonder why he has decided to change the goalpost now. But Africa, father, because of the sympathy, and you have now decided to say that. Now, if you could continue to see that, you have seen what is happening in other African countries, Somalia, Ethiopia, name them. Is that what you are going to witness in the DRC? God forbid that. Patrick Okraford, when I'm calling from Arutuku here in Nigeria. Have a blessed day.
Thank you very much. Let's go to the other side of the continent, and we have Martin from Uganda. Martin, you're most welcome.
Good evening. Good evening, Ndugu Shaka.
You're most welcome, Ndugu Martin.
Thank you.
1 minute.
You see, the problems in DR Congo are not new. The entire Great Lakes region of Africa is suffering from the big brother syndrome in Uganda. Take an example: Rwanda, Burundi, Congo. All of these are boys we know that have grown into leaders in these countries, and they've grown on the streets in Kampala, and they speak the local dialect, Luganda. So they copy a leaf from their big brother here, and they castigate the UN, the Security Council, and UN Assembly. They give the same despots time to go and give long speeches when they have blood on their hands. I would want to say one thing as I conclude.
Thank you.
We, the sons and daughters of Africa, are sick and tired of these post-independent leaders that have turned us into animals, just for the greed of the power. Thank you, Shaka.
You're most welcome. Let's stay in Uganda. Moses, you're most welcome to Straight Talk Africa.
Good morning to Shaka.
Terrific. You have 30 seconds. Time is not our best ally, Moses.
Yes, I understand. You see, the problem with DRC Congo. Hello?
Yes, please.
You see, all these leaders, like the Joseph Kabila, the Kagame, went through Uganda. So what do you expect?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Why don't you respond to that, and of course also tell us, Claude, about the significance of next weekend's forum event about the African Great Lakes, which is, of course, is it commemorating or remembering the invasion of the DRC 20 years ago?
We are commemorating the 20 years of since the invasion of the Congo in 1996.
Why do you call it invasion? Some people say the liberation.
It was a war of aggression by Rwanda and Uganda that invaded, and the first thing they did was to go to stocks of mines and goods for sale. But what we're celebrating also on Saturday is the resilience of the people of the Congo, because they have resisted for 20 years. They've gone through major atrocities, and they still continue to push forward. We're also, we're going to have, it's an all-day forum. It's in New York, 99 Madison Avenue, and it starts at 8 o'clock on Saturday, this coming Saturday. We're going to have scholars, activists, experts, former UN group of expert leaders. We're going to have survivors, and we're going to have keynotes, panels, and film screenings. Just both showing the tragedy of what's happening in the Congo and also highlighting what our participation is as members of the international community in providing prescriptions and our recommendations for ending this cycle of violence that is started 20 years ago and continues today and seems to be on the brink of continuing.
Now, you have a minute from some of the people that called in. They seem to point out that the problem, the epicenter of the problem, probably may in fact be in the Ugandan capital, Kampala.
Well,
do you agree?
Could be in the Ugandan capital, could be in the Rwandan capital, because as we see today, we see some small attempts again to go into war.
Some might say with the help perhaps of some Western capitals.
Yeah, we see the, Beni today with all the killings that are going in Beni, and they say it's the ADF Nalu from Uganda. We see, we heard from, I think Central African Service here that there's a group that wants to start another war in the eastern, in South Kivu. The point that is here, and I think the caller put the hand, there's been bloodshed. And maybe people are not looking at that. And from my point of view, I think there's fear in the Kabila camp that there will be retributions after that. And maybe that's why they wanted, the U.S. wanted a dialogue in October 2014. Well, never took place.
Unfortunately, time happens not to be our best ally. And on that note, thanks to our distinguished guests, Claude Gatebuche, Executive Director, African Great Lakes Action Network, and Taro Alimus, an independent consultant in governance and anti-corruption. Thanks to our affiliate stations, along with our viewers and listeners, we thank you for tuning in. For many of our Voice of America radio affiliates, Learning English is coming up next. And tomorrow morning, Daybreak Africa with James Bate. On behalf of the Voice of America, thanks for tuning into Straight Talk Africa. In the meantime, get better, DRC, not bitter. And please remember to keep the African hopes alive.